Okay, we are recording. Want to go ahead and welcome everybody to our URISA Texas monthly speaker series. Glad to have you all. We've got a very good presentation ready for you today, so we're pretty excited about it. Give the introductions here in a second. My name is Brian King. I am a board member of URISA Texas and past president, and I work for Freese & Nichols. Another one of your hosts here today is Ollie Powers, and Ollie, you can introduce yourself.
Sure, I'm Ollie Powers. I'm Secretary of URISA Texas, and I'm a GIS analyst with the City of Mesquite.
Very good. So, any rate, we have a few things coming up before we get started. Some marketing, just let you know what URISA Texas has coming up and planned. I think Ollie was going to announce a few events we got going.
Sure. The first one we've got next week, we have our April Mappy Hour in Austin at Red's Porch Quarry. So for those of you in the Austin area, we'd love to see you at 6:30 on Tuesday, April 3rd at Red's Porch. Also, we're going to be having another Mappy Hour at SCOG in San Antonio, and that'll be Monday, April 9th, and that'll be at the Friendly Spot in downtown San Antonio. And both these events can be found on our events page at urisatexas.org. Finally, we're just going to announce Slice of Pie, a Python GIS workshop in Austin. It's actually fully booked, but for those who want to either advance their Python skills or learn Python, get in touch with SWGIS because they're going to be hosting more of these in the Austin area. So you can go to SWGIS, and I believe Megan Brown, who's on here, if you want to contact her for more information as well, you can also do that. Back to you, Brian.
All right. And yeah, the Mappy Hour that's on April the 3rd is actually in joint venture with Syntex, and I believe you can check out their website. They're going to be holding their meeting prior to the Red's Porch event at the Freese & Nichols Austin offices in Northwest Austin. So you can also check it out on the events page. We're going to go ahead and get started here. We appreciate everybody coming. Today's topic is lessons learned developing a UAS program for local government. Our guest speaker today is Mark Buie. He is the GIS Coordinator for the City of Mesquite. He's been interested in the Unmanned Aerial Systems for a long time. He's also, like me, a fellow archaeologist and transitioned to GIS a while back. He's been in Scotland. He gained his master's in GIS and Archaeology at the University of Edinburgh. And without further ado, we're going to let Mark go ahead and take over, and we hope you all enjoy the presentation. I'll let Mark give an idea of the outline of his presentation. Here you go, Mark.
All right, thank you, Brian, and thank you all for logging in. I'm excited to be giving this talk. Those of you who know me know how much I love talking about drones. Sometimes maybe a bit too much, but in this case we have the whole next hour, maybe a little bit less, to discuss drones. So today we're talking about the lessons learned developing an unmanned aerial system UAS program, which I'll refer to as drones from here on out. It's pretty easy just using the default settings on the drone and the software to produce some type of data. So the assumption for this talk is that we're after the highest resolution, highest accuracy data. The way I have this talk structured is I've kind of identified the key steps to developing a drone program and then selected the biggest lessons or two that I've learned for each step. It is a lessons learned. It's not meant to be a comprehensive guide. If you're new to drones, I think you'll come away with kind of the key terminologies of drone regulations and basic mapping theory, which you can then use for further research. And if you already know everything, it's always good to hear things from different perspectives. Just a quick overview of our program. Around mid-2016, started asking managers if I could get a drone, and by February 2017, we purchased a DJI Inspire. I really like this aircraft. I highly recommend it. And then since then, we've logged about 28 hours with 20 or so unique projects. Just a quick idea of what we've been up to. So we've done overview shots for projects, building inspection. This is more of a proof of concept for us. We're looking to get our building inspectors licensed, but we have a nice zoom lens on our drone that you can really get up close with this infrastructure, and that way no one has to climb up this water tower. More of the GIS side. So for those of you who don't know, you can take a series of overlapping images and put them through this software and spits out all this cool GIS data. In this case, there's a DEM. And what we're seeing in the center is this is a pedestrian bridge that runs over a creek. And you can see this massive erosion going on the north and south sides. And, this started off as just monitoring. But what we actually ended up doing is generating contours, passed those off to our engineers, and then they designed a plan to fix this erosion. So that was pretty cool. Traffic studies, these are some of my favorite. We've noticed that policymakers really respond well to the videos. Instead of just handing a report with traffic counts and lots of words, you can give them a few seconds of a video, and you can really see what's going on. And then so emergency management. So during hurricane events, Mesquite takes in evacuees and helps them get to different shelters within the DFW area. We have these resource staging maps now. Traditionally, these were made in GIS. You might have a polygon up here in the right corner that says security area, or another one down here that says intake area. But during our last event, we used the drone to document where everything went with the high-res ortho, and emergency management really liked that, and they we're in the process of transferring all of our resource staging maps over to this format. So that was just a quick overview of what we've been up to. We're going to talk about regulations. So, if I had to redo our program, or anytime someone asks me how to develop a drone program, I always say check your airspace first. And we know that the FAA considers drones as aircrafts. They're limited to this Class G airspace. You can get additional licensing, but at the base level, you're restricted to Class G. Other airspace restrictions may exist, so like your temporary flight restrictions. We have one here in Dallas. So understanding your airspace will kind of help you determine how complex your program is going to be to get off the ground. This is just a map I made. It's all the airspace you might run into for the DFW area. So over here in Terrell, my hometown, it's all in Class G. They're going to have a really easy time getting their program started. In Mesquite, half of our airspace is Class G, but we also have this Class D airspace with our local airport. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult for us. Then you have places like Irving. They're completely surrounded in restricted airspace. And then you have places like Grand Prairie where they have multiple, different types of airspace. So Irving would just need to file for one waiver, whereas Grand Prairie, they have to file a waiver for each one of those. So just having an understanding really helps. You certainly wouldn't be in the position where you've asked your manager to buy a drone, they say yes, and then you find out later that you actually can't fly it just yet. So onto the federal regulations. You have kind of three options to fly. You can fly as a hobbyist. It's not really licensed, but you do have to follow certain rules. You have your Part 107. It's also called your commercial license. This is what we operate under. You take a test, you pay your $150, and then you can fly under the rules that the FAA set forth. There's also a another option for government. It's called the COA. I don't have many details about the COA. It's not a route we decided to take. When I was researching it, I was kind of put off by the monthly reporting requirements, and I really didn't identify any benefits over the Part 107 for us. So there's not much I think you can you do with the COA that you can't do with Part 107. And our fire department actually has gone this route. They started before we did. Back in April 2016, and up until a couple of months ago, they are still going through this process for their final jurisdictional COA. Now, I talked to them the other day, and it's my understanding that they've completely abandoned this route and opted to go for the Part 107 just because it's a lot more simple. So I'm not going to go all into the Part 107 rules. I think they're pretty well documented, but I did want to share a quick story about interpreting the rules. So I got my license, and one of the first projects was we were repaving this road, and they wanted me to fly down the road to get before shots of the project. But I had to explain that we can't fly over people or moving vehicles. But there was this nice wide median down the center of the road, and they asked if we could just fly down that. The rules say we can't fly over people, but so to us it seemed acceptable to do that. Another question was, we have these construction sites. We don't want to stop our work. Can we have a tailgate meeting and the workers just give consent, and now they're part of the drone operation, so we can fly over them? I've seen people interpret this both ways. And in this case, we decided to err on the side of caution, took directly participating literally. But we did fly down the median a few times. Now, later on, I was at a FAA panel, and a lot of people, these same questions were raised by the people there. And the FAA asked us, have we read the final Part 107? And I'm thinking to myself, no, I have no idea what this is. What that is a bunch of organizations, had some problems interpreting the Part 107 rules. So they all got together with the FAA, and they kind of hashed it out. They produced this 600-page document called the final Part 107. And 21 pages and 10,000 words are just about flying over people. And what it says is that no, you can't give consent to allow operations over people. It directly states that you can't have tailgate meetings. But what's interesting is what it says about flying over people, and that it's not just flying over people. It's the course, the speed, and the trajectory, including the possibility of catastrophic failure, has to be taken into account when you're dealing with flying over people. So medians are kind of no longer on the table these days. So the lesson there is to know about the final Part 107, because it's not something that when you take your Part 107 test that they point you to. It's so it's good to know that exists. Waivers, you don't have to read all these. We're not going to go through all of them. The lesson here is that just because they exist doesn't mean you can actually get them. So one of them, the flying over people, again, we wanted to fly over people to document some of our events here in town, and telling them we can't fly over people. But for a while there, I knew you'd get this waiver, so I was telling them that we could get this waiver. Well, it turns out that for the longest time, it still may be true that CNN is the only people that have ever got this. I think a few more have, but not very many. So it's not very obtainable waiver. This last one, the controlled airspace, when we were looking at getting one of these, it was kind of ambiguous what authorization and waiver meant, or the difference between the two. It's cleared up now. I think it specifically says on the FAA website, but for those of you who don't know, the waiver is just you're asking to enter a restricted airspace without contacting air traffic control, which takes a lot more mitigation to do that. What you're probably after is authorization, and that gives you access, gives you the option to request that you enter the airspace from air traffic control. So you exchange information, you tell them where they're going to be flying. And again, the lesson here is that just because you have it doesn't mean you can use it all the time. So I've actually been denied once when asking for it. It was just because they lost the paperwork. I had it faxed over, no big deal. We did lose a day. But a lot of the times when I'm asking for, a certain altitude, even though it's within my waiver, they kind of ask me to drop it down. So it's something to consider when you're planning your missions. State and local laws, be aware that they exist here in Texas. We have the Texas Privacy Act. It was sponsored by Lance Gooden in 2013. And it says you can't capture an image of an individual or private property with the intent to conduct surveillance. Now, intent is defined. You have to have the conscious objective to conduct surveillance, but surveillance isn't. And I've heard drone pilots kind of interpret this on kind of all spectrums, from all the way from you can't take a picture of anyone at all to, it's just, close observation spying. Another thing it says is you can't fly over correctional facilities or critical infrastructure facility. It gives a big long list of and a definition of what critical infrastructure is. And political subdivisions may not adopt or enforce any drone ordinance. So like your counties or say the City of Mesquite, we can't impose ordinances. So I could spend all day discussing the Texas Privacy Act. I could give you my interpretation, but at the end of the day, that's exactly what it's going to be. It's just an interpretation because to date, the Texas Privacy Act has never been challenged. So there's no legal history to help us define what these rules means to clarify what surveillance means. Another issue is that with the Texas Privacy Act is, you have the regulations over airspace, but the FAA has made it perfectly clear that they have the sole authorization to do so, so that federal law preempts state and local. And we're starting to see this in the local news. So at a city in Massachusetts, the man sued the city because they had imposed these drone ordinances. The city said you can't fly under 400 feet, you can't fly over private property, and they required their drone operators in the city to have extra regulations. And the judge ruled in favor of federal law and said it preempted the state. And then the final issue is, it says local drone ordinances, can't exist, but that's exactly what we see in the DFW area. We have cities that impose ordinances. So you can kind of see that there's this kind of overlapping of laws, a kind of power struggle between governments. So when I got into this, I never knew how much I would need to pay attention to politics. I mean, I have bill trackers that send me alerts whenever the Texas Privacy Act is about to be amended. So it's a constant process, a constant learning opportunity there. My advice is that, if you're working for a city or a company, you probably have a legal team. Go talk to them, get their opinion, and more importantly, see under what conditions they'll protect you. If you're going at it alone, I would highly recommend hiring a lawyer. I don't think I would fly without some sort of legal backing. So those are the lessons learned over the regulations. Next, we're going to talk about equipment. So which drone should I buy? There's all sorts of types of drones. It doesn't really matter which one you buy as long as it fits your scope of work. I will say that if you are starting out, the multi-rotor is probably your best bet. It's easy to fly. It's accessible. I can go out to pretty much any toy store and buy a good one that will do mapping missions. They're cheap, relatively, and they're scalable. So they'll do your mapping missions, but they can also hover, so they can do your things like building inspection. So if you're just starting out, I highly recommend one of those. When I'm looking at a drone, I kind of consider two main features. Does it have a mechanical shutter? Mechanical shutter reduces the rolling shutter distortion. You can look that up. It's pretty cool. And then, does it have a large sensor? So generally with a large sensor, you have larger individual pixel sensors, and those create better quality, sharper images. So our drone, the Inspire 2, has a micro Four Thirds sensor. It's a pretty big sensor for a drone, and it makes nice, good quality images. The other thing is that usually with a larger sensor, you have a higher resolution. And usually what that means is you can achieve a smaller ground sampling distance. Now there's other factors at play, such as your focal length, but generally the larger the sensor, the higher the resolution, the smaller the ground sampling distance. And the ground sampling distance is just the real world distance between the centers of two adjacent image pixels. You can think of it as a spatial resolution that we want for our data, but it shouldn't be confused with accuracy. It's just the resolution. I usually use a ground sampling distance of around 1 centimeter for my projects, which means that 1 pixel in my image represents 1 centimeter on the ground. Now, the advantage of having a really high camera resolution is that we can fly higher and still achieve an acceptable ground resolution. So we could lower our altitude and get a even better resolution, but that kind of puts us in jeopardy of obstruction. So for some reason, for some reason, anytime I go out and do a project, there's always this high voltage power line running straight to the project. So it's good to be able to fly high and still be within the scope of our project. Also, it helps with concerns about privacy. So, if I'm having to fly down low to get a good resolution, I might be flying over people's houses very close to their rooftops, and people don't like that. So the ability to fly high is a good advantage, and you need a high resolution to do that. So these are just some ground sampling distance for common drones. I've taken these parameters from my flight software, and so our drone, we have this DJI Zenmuse X5S. At 400 feet, you get a nice 2.7 ground sampling distance, which is really great. But things like the Phantom 4, it has these old small sensors, and at 400 feet, you only get around 5.2. It might be good enough for your project, but you might also have to lower it down to get an acceptable ground sampling distance. The Phantom 4 Pro, a little bit better. They have a nice 1-inch sensor, and you can get a nice 3.2 centimeter ground sampling distance at 400 feet. I will say that the Inspire 2, it has the option of kind of these two cameras. If you are going for the Inspire 2, make sure you're getting the X5S, because as you can see, if you go for the X4S, your ground sampling distance is actually worse than the Phantom 4 Pro, and the Phantom 4 Pro and Advanced are a fraction of the cost. So if you're dishing out money for the Inspire 2, make sure you're getting that X5S. Otherwise, you're just buying an overpriced Phantom 4. And then I just threw this one in here. It's a $3,000 DSLR camera. It has a full frame sensor. And with that thing, if you could strap that to a drone at 400 feet, you'd get sub-centimeter ground sampling distance. So I think that would be very cool. So far, we've only been talking about the drone. I was kind of lucky. I studied drone mapping for my master's, so I had a kind of a pretty good idea of what we needed. But starting off, it still felt like there was just always something else we needed to buy. So what I've done is I've tried to compile all the purchases, or at least the value if it's something we already had, to get an idea of the total cost. And I'll just quickly run through some of these. So for each license, it costs that much. Our Inspire 2 with the X5S is this much. Batteries, you can never have too many. We have 10. I wish I had about a double that amount. Of course, you need to charge them. And if you're going to be in emergency management, you may want to have the capability to stay aloft for 24 hours straight. I know some cities have done that, so your budget for batteries is going to be a lot higher. Extra controller. So our Phantom, or our Inspire 2 I can be a piloting, and then I can have another controller for, say, our building inspector, and they can control the camera. Of course, since we have two controllers, we need 2 iPads, additional lenses, so we can switch out the lenses. We have that nice zoom lens I was referring to. GPS, so if you're trying to make accurate models, you need a good mapping or survey grade GPS. So I tried looking up ours. It's been discontinued, so I just looked up the next model, the Geo Explorer 7000, and that's what I got. Backpack, that's the one I didn't consider. You need to carry all these batteries and things, and personal protective equipment. If you're not buying that to be safe, buy it to be incognito. It seems when you put on a safety vest and hard hat, no one ever bothers you. So gas, food, you gotta get to your project site. A Wi-Fi hotspot, that's one I overlooked. Our iPads didn't have the cellular capabilities, so I got to the project site and realized I needed internet, so I had to fire up my phone and create a Wi-Fi hotspot. Photogrammetry software, so that's a rough idea of how much our costs. Image processing software, you don't really need this one. We had Photoshop. I like to shoot in RAW so I can then post-process my images and correct any lighting issues, but it wouldn't be a big deal if we didn't have that. Video processing software, so if you're going to go into marketing, you're going to create cool videos, you need some way to splice those all together. Workstation, so if you're making your 3D models, or your orthos or DMs, they're computationally intensive, so you need some sort of workstation. Ours is kind of on the high end. It has once we get the GPU, it'll have a nice GPU unit. Right now, we just have the base workstation. Training drones. So you may know how to fly a drone, but is the person you're going to train, the new person coming in, do they know how to fly? And if they don't, do you want to train them on your $5,000 drone? So we use a little Pocket Nano drone, I think they're called. Fits in the palm of your hand, 19 bucks. You can crash them all you want. It's no big deal. Insurance, so you need to protect your assets. Lawyers, hopefully we understand why from the previous section. And then time. So developing this program and going out and flying, that takes time. I'd say I'm easily devoting 33%, maybe 40% of my time to drones. Now, once we get more people licensed, I hope for that to go down, but that it does take time and you have to budget for that. So. All right, that was lessons learned for the equipment. On to processing and distribution. Now, what I mean by processing is creating, using structure for motion photogrammetry to create your GIS data. So like your 3D models, your point clouds, your ortho imagery, and digital elevation models and all that good stuff. Again, so these are kind of the top softwares I've run into. It really doesn't matter which software you choose. I used all of these except Drone Deploy, and I would be happy using them again. But things to consider is that there are desktop versions and cloud versions. If you're going for a cloud version, make sure they're not downsampling your images when you upload them, because that can reduce the quality of your images. Licenses, we live in the world of subscriptions these days, but there are a few around that have standalone license, Agisoft and Pix4D. Scripting, so you may or may not need this. When I was, I originally thought Drone to Map leveraged ArcPy, but when I was researching it for this presentation, I couldn't find that anymore, so I apologize if that's not correct. Pix4D does limited batch scripting, and then Agisoft, my favorite, does a full Python API. You can do everything within Python, which is really cool. So I can just set up folders, I can drop all my images in there, and it can run at night, or you can even integrate it with ArcPy to go straight from processing right into your analysis, which is pretty cool. Again, it's all computationally intensive, so you need some type of workstation if you're going for the desktop versions. The hardware that you need kind of depends on which software you choose. So ours, Agisoft, is very GPU dependent, or I've read that Pix4D and therefore Drone to Map are more CPU intensive. I will say it's really important to have your own dedicated workstation, because these models can take several days to process. So if you want to be able to continue using your computer to do your normal work, you need to have a dedicated workstation. But any of the desktop versions, the RAM is going to be the limiting factor. So RAM kind of determines how many images you can process. So it limits the amount of the size of the project you can do. So you need a lot of RAM. Again, it doesn't matter which software you go with. They all pretty much have the same outputs. But what I've found is that by having a general understanding of how the software works has really helped me plan, more efficient projects and ultimately produce better models. And basically how all these softwares work is you have a series of overlapping images, and then you detect unique features within the image. And then you try to find those images across those unique features across the image. So in this case, we have these red dot representing the same corner of this cube. And once you have that, you can triangulate the position in 3D space in a local coordinate system. And the more images you have, the better these calculations. But again, it's computationally intensive, so it's going to require more processing time. So it's kind of a trade-off between how many images you have and how much you're willing to process. What is really cool is that we can use Python or C++ with the OpenCV, Open Computer Vision library. We actually make our own structure for motion software. It can really help you understand how the software works. So this is just an image from one of our surveys, and I used OpenCV to do kind of the first processing step of any structure for motion software, which is feature detection. So that's going into one image and finding all the unique features within that image. And that's what we see here. All these green dots are unique features. There's 500,000 of them in this case. You really only need 4,000 to make a model, but I wanted to identify trends, so I ramped it up. And what we see is that anytime there's a solid color, so on the tennis courts and the sidewalks here and this our nice trail, we don't have that many or none at all matches or feature detection going on. Also with the shadows. And that's because feature detection relies on, and computer vision, what's called corner detection. So you need contrast. You also need sharp images and angles. And we kind of see that on the lines of the tennis court. So where there's a nice straight line, there's no detection going on. But as we get to the corner, all of a sudden you get a bunch of features matched there. So we can use this information to help plan better surveys. So if our boss asks us to produce a 3D model of this water tower, can we do it? Well, it's pretty much all solid white. You got solid white rooftops here. So let's see what we get. And that's what we see. So there's not much feature detection going on the water tower itself. We also have kind of these repeating patterns in the background. Now remember, once we find our features, we have to find them in other images, and then we can triangulate their position. So having these repeating patterns can confuse the algorithm and decrease the accuracy of your model. Now, can we actually make a 3D model of this tower? Yes, the software is very robust. It has other algorithms that compensate for these limitations, but we can let our manager know that we may have to take more images, which is going to increase our processing time. The quality may not be what previous projects have been, and then ultimately we can ask for more time because we're processing more images. So we're probably not here to do this as a hobby. We're an organization, we're a business. We want to make sure that the data we're producing is sound, it's a good quality, or it's the quality we say it is. So we need to have some sort of QA/QC process in place. So some of my performance indicators are the lighting. It's kind of counter to satellite imagery. Overcast is really great because it dissipates the light. It removes those shadows that they can't do feature detection in. If I don't have it overcast, I'd prefer a nice sunny bright day with no clouds, and then the absolute worst would probably be clouds running in and out, changing light conditions. GPS, my H-star carrier lock, how long I've had that, it's going to determine what my final accuracy is. Found that if I can get that over 40, it really increases the accuracy. But I don't necessarily need it. It's just an indicator of how the accuracy of my final product. Number of ground truthing points. So I'll talk about that in the next few slides, whether I have them or how many I have. Image overlap. I prefer 80/80, which is pretty high. But again, the more images we have, the better. The better chance we have of producing a sound model. And sometimes it takes a really long time to set up these surveys, so I want to make sure I get it on the first go around. So, I ramped it out. I can always thin them out later if I don't need all those images. Image sharpness and cross-flight we'll talk about in the next section. So just about all these programs have some sort of quality report you can print off. I think they're really cool to look at. They give you some pretty good information, but they're riddled with this reference to the RMS error, the root mean square error. This one on the right is a processing report from Drone to Map. Has this box called quality check, and within it is it references this georeferencing error. And I think it'd be easy to confuse this with the accuracy of the model. I think it's a bit misleading. And I really think you need your own kind of independent quality control check. So I follow the National Standard for Spatial Data Accuracy. It's pretty simple. All you do is you take your GPS, you go to your project area, and you GPS, unique features within your project that you'll be able to identify in your model. So that's what we've done here on the right. We have this nice right angle from a sidewalk, and the model tells us it's at this point, but the GPS says it's actually a little bit further down. So we just calculate the residual We do that for all of our ground control points, or sorry, our ground truthing points. So here we have the GPS, and what the GPS says, what the model says. We just take the difference, we square the difference, and then we take the average of both of those, and then we take the square root of that, and that gives us our accuracy. Now, we can actually take this further. We can calculate it to the 95% confidence level, but we first got to check if our root mean square min divided by max is between 0.6 and 1. If it is, and we have a normally distributed error, which we do, we can use this formula to calculate at the 95% confidence level. In this case, 0.16 feet, but who wants to use the imperial system? So I calculate that to centimeters, and it's about 5 centimeters. So that's quite a big difference from the 1.4 centimeters that the software told us, the software report told us. So when you start making claims about your accuracy, we're entering the discipline of surveying, and surveying takes a lot of education. It requires a certification, multiple certifications, I believe. I'm not a surveyor. I do attempt to evaluate the accuracy of my data, but everything I deliver comes with this big disclaimer that the data is provided as is, no warranty, and it's up to you how you use it. Now, I tell our clients that I tell them this before we start the project, and then again when I deliver the data, and also give them, of course, the metadata with the reports and my methodologies for everything. If someone hands you some drone data, ask them, how was it evaluated? What's the accuracy? And then, of course, if you're interpreting legal boundaries, your setbacks, your property boundaries, you need to be a registered professional land surveyor to do that. So that was the lessons learned for processing and distribution. We're going to move on to surveying methods, just a couple of lessons here. I think the first is kind of the importance of ground control points if we're after accuracy. So ground control points have probably the greatest effect on the final accuracy of the model, but they're also the most labor-intensive process of the workflow. So in the field, you gotta hike around your project area, you gotta place your ground control points, you gotta GPS them, which takes a long time. And then when you get in the field, get out of the field into the office, you have to post-process the data and then actually go into the software and zoom in on each of these ground control points in your images and tell the software where they are. It takes a long time. It's easy to want to cut corners, but it's important to remain diligent because it does have the most effect on the final accuracy. Do I even need ground control points? So it depends. If you're after the relative accuracy, if you're just calculating distances or areas and volumes within the model, you probably don't. Photogrammetry is really good at that. So I just recently calculated the volume of some of our stockpiles at a recycling center. In that case, I did put ground control points. I just kind of do it. You never know where your data is going to end up, so I like it to have some accuracy. But I didn't have to do that. If we want to do it quick, I'd have no problem not using ground control points. But we're probably all GIS. We drag that ortho into ArcMap. We want it to be where it actually is in the real world. So we're probably after absolute accuracy. If you have a GPS on your drone, which most of the new ones these days do, you can get around 3 to 30 meters accuracy just with the onboard GPS. That's about 10 feet, 10 to 100 feet. Sorry. If you're lucky enough to have an RTK equipped drone, you probably don't need ground control points at all. You can achieve around 2 centimeter accuracy just with that. But so if you want more than that 3 meters, you really need to use ground control points. The distribution, so where do you put them? When I first started out, I was crazy about ground control points, and I put out tons of them. I think sometimes up to 20 for these kind of small drone surveys. And what I've learned over the years, I've kind of reduced them. And while I monitored the final accuracy, what I found is you really only need about 5. Depending on your project. Given the limitations, the size limitations of a survey. 5 will pretty much do it. If there's more complex geometries, you got undulation, lots of trees or vegetation, I'll put out more, but in general 5 will do it. What's more important is, where you put them. So you want them in the corners of your survey and maybe one in the middle. In this case, this is long and slender, so I probably would have put two, one on each side here in the middle. But what this map is showing, this is a report from Agisoft, and it's showing how much overlap we have for each image. And what we see is as we get to the edges, our image overlap decreases. So you want them at the corners, but not the absolute corner. You want them tucked in so that you get the full overlap of your images. So these would be correctly placed, and these down here would be incorrect. Collecting your ground control points. The lesson for me here is read the manual of your GPS. If you're like me and someone hands you a $7,000 GPS, you expect it to have a high accuracy right out of the box. But I was using it. I was getting these peaks of 1 meter accuracy, which I wasn't happy with. And I finally read the manual and found all these neat features that I should have been using to get good accuracy. Another interesting thing, it's not a GPS feature, but I read an article, I think it's from Esri, and about processing with multiple base stations. So when I was first doing this, I would process with just one. It's a lot quicker to post-process your GPS data with just one. But it turns out, according to this article, it actually skews your data in the direction of the base station. And what they recommend is actually using multiple base stations in a nice circle around your project area. So I've started to do that, and it may only be a couple of centimeters, but sometimes that can count for a lot. So when you're collecting your ground control points, you really need this pole and antenna to get the most precise data. We actually don't have one of these, and so if you don't have one of those, you may have seen it. I've done it before. You can use this method, which I've coined the hover method. This guy's doing it here. You stand over your ground control point and you take your point. Now, I don't trust myself to be able to hold it exactly where the ground control is. So what I do is I place it on the ground, on top of the ground control point. But as I was doing this, I was kind of wondering, how is this affecting the accuracy of the GPS points? Is it any better than this hover method? So what I did is I found a USGS monument and placed a ground control point over it, and I walked up to it and took a point 20 times with the hover method, and again with my method of just placing it on the ground. And what I found is that just by placing it on the ground, you get pretty good accuracy. So the average was around 5 centimeter error with a high of 8 centimeters, which is well within the specs of what the GPS is supposed to be. But with the hover method, maybe I just have unsteady arms. You're getting pretty high error. So if you don't have a pole-mounted antenna, placing it on the ground is a good alternative. Just a quick lessons about flight parameters. So again, when I was starting, I was creating these orthos, and what I found is the orthos weren't as true as I would like them to be. When I was looking at buildings, they seemed to be kind of slanted. I could see the sides of buildings, and so I did some research, and I came across this article talking about the importance of a cross pattern or a cross flight, and how it increases vertical accuracy. So again, when I first started, you fly one mission, or it's out and back in this lawnmower pattern. The cross flight is you just do another one that's perpendicular. And since I've started doing that, I've been producing these beautiful, true orthos. But again, that increases the amount of images we have and increases the processing time. So another thing I learned is the importance of, or the relationship between the speed, your shutter speed, and your ground sampling distance. So, consider we have a drone traveling 5 meters per second with a shutter speed of 1/1000th of a second. As our drone is moving along, we take a picture and the shutter opens. Well, the aircraft continues moving, in this case 5 millimeters before the shutter closes and completes our picture. If our ground sampling distance is less than the travel distance, we get blurry images and less accurate models. So we want to make sure that our distance traveled is about 1/3 of our ground sampling distance. Now, some flight software, including ours, has a stop and hover function. It'll stop at each point where it's going to take an image, stop, and then take the image, and then continue on its path. I found that it really limits the size of the project you can do. It's fine if you're just doing a small project, but if you're doing a larger, it can really eat up your flight time. And then I've also found that when using the stop and hover mode on our software, it isn't taking into account how long it should actually stop the drone to fully take the picture. And to test this out, I set it at a very low shutter speed of 2 seconds, and the aircraft would get to its point, it would stop, it would take, the picture would trigger, but then the drone would just keep on moving while the 2 seconds were still counting down, and then I get these nice, terrible, blurry images. So just be mindful of what your software is actually doing. And it's also a good practice. If we ever purchase a fixed wing, those can't hover. So this is a theory we need to understand. So kind of have an advantage that we use it already. Kind of the final lesson here is kind of one of the most important things I realize is the benefit of understanding the theory of photography. This has allowed me to move away from using just the auto settings and really leverage the camera parameters. So if I have a large project, I can ramp up the shutter speed, so I can do larger projects or shorter, smaller projects faster. But of course, that may require a larger aperture to let in more light, and doing so might decrease the depth of field where maybe my trees or my buildings aren't in focus. And then, of course, the aperture, most lenses have a sweet spot, so I want to stay in between 5 to 8 aperture. I could compensate for the lower light by ramping up the ISO, but then that might lead to grainy images, which is going to produce less accurate models. So I got into it because I like drones, but I've learned all these other concepts like photography, law, surveying. So that was kind of the final lesson. I'll just close by saying that, when we talk about drones, we often refer to them as this new technology, but it's important to remember that the only thing that's really new is the drone itself. So the sensors that the drones are carrying, the disciplines of computer vision, photogrammetry, surveying, photography, that we use to create our data, they've been around for a really long time. It's just become more accessible. And so having an understanding of these disciplines can really help your drone program reach its full potential. So I think this time we're going to open it up to questions. If you need to leave or you have a question later on, I have my contact details right here. I'll actually go ahead and paste these into the chat box. And Brian, I'll go ahead and turn it over back to you.
All right. Well, Mark, thank you for a wonderful presentation. We really appreciate it. Ollie, I've unmuted you as well. So we've got about 10 minutes left here, and we've got a few questions in the chat window, so I'm going to get right to it. If for some reason we don't get to all the questions, Mark we'll send them to him, and maybe he can answer them that way, and we'll get them posted and sent out. Okay. One question from Jordan is, are there any advantages to running everything in UTM versus state plane?
Yeah, that's a good question. Generally, I ask my clients what coordinate system they want, and I try to keep the model, the whole process within the same coordinate system to reduce any transformation errors. So, I don't know. I don't know if there's an advantage to one over the other. So that's a good question.
All right, another one Jordan had here. The airspace map is great. He'd be interested in where to grab the data inputs.
Sure. So the data came from the FAA. I think we're going to distribute the PDFs. I will drop the link from that data onto the PDFs.
Okay.
But you can get them from the FAA somewhere.
Great. Terry has a question for you. How far away from a moving vehicle would you need to be to comply?
Oh dear. That's one I can't answer. I'd rarely encourage you to read the final part 107. A lot of people had that same question. The FAA's response, some people mention that if taken literally, you have to take into account the fact that your drone could have a catastrophic, failure. Mine could take off and fly 3 miles down the road. So, if taken literally, I couldn't fly near anybody for 3 miles. And that was raised in this final Part 107. And the FAA has said that this is a standard. It's up to the pilot to come up with some sort of mitigation process to follow the standard. So, that's a good question. It's one I can't answer. You have to come up with some way of determining that yourself.
Okay. Let's see here. Terry has another one here for you. What are the pros and cons of flying a single project at different altitudes?
That's also a good question. I don't know that one. I always fly at the same height. I would say sorry, I guess, is that flying one project with images from multiple flights, or just flying from different? So if it's separate projects, flying higher, you can complete a project quicker, but it is going to reduce your resolution. So you definitely don't want to fly high enough that you're outside of the scope. So you need to define before you even do your project, define the resolution that you're after, and then make sure you're flying within that. So go ahead.
Terry asks here, what do you do if you have higher ups encouraging you to fly near moving vehicles anyway? So I guess that still goes back to the 107.
Yeah, that's something I've encountered a lot. You are the pilot. It's ultimately, if something happens, it's going to come back to you. So you just tell them, no, you can't do that.
I understand. Matt here, we've got about 6 minutes here. Let's just try to squeeze them in. We're still recording. Matt, what is the largest area that can be typically covered in a single mission with good resolution? Can you combine data from single flights to cover a larger area?
Yeah, absolutely. You can combine multiple flights together. How much area you can cover, it's going to depend on your drone. So ours, I think the largest, I'll need to double check this. Again, I'll put it in the slides, but I think the largest I've done is 36 acres. And I'll point out that to do that, I really had to leverage that shutter speed to go beyond the auto settings, because you are moving quite fast to get that 36 acres. So you need a shutter speed that will compensate for that. So that's a good advantage of knowing, having a good theory of photography. But yeah, if you can definitely stitch together multiple projects.
Okay. I'll try to squeeze in a few more here. Ben asked a question. How many people do you anticipate training to fly the drone, and do you have a standard training routine?
So we anticipate, I believe, licensing everyone in our office. So that's 7 people. We also have building inspectors. There'll be multiple from that. I don't have a hard figure, but we have quite a few training routines. That was kind of the advantage of going to Part 107. The training, a lot of the regulations are kind of built in as far as training for the drone. That's why I like those pocket drones. So again, I don't want to be training people on our expensive
Sure.
Inspire 2, so you can use the pocket one for that. So
Sure. All right, we got a couple of minutes here. Randy, if most of the projects I would be working on are in rural areas, would you still recommend getting certified through FAA to fly the UAS?
Yes, you have to. There's no exception there. If you're doing it for business, you have to be certified.
Okay.
On the Part 107.
How long does a typical battery last?
Depends on the drone. Ours lasts about 20 to 24 minutes, depending on the weather conditions.
Okay. Jeremy says, have you used any projects or products offered by Precision Hawk, such as Precision Mapper, Precision Flight, or Precision Viewer? If so, what was your experience?
I have not. Most of everything we do is with the DJI products. So.
All right, and I have a quick question here for you. Have you ever tried post-processing your data within the cloud environment, like the Amazon EC2, the AWS, to speed up that processing?
I haven't. At one point I did fire up an Azure trial, but I was a bit ambitious and threw kind of too much data at it, and my subscription failed or ran out before then. So the problem with that I ran in with Azure is that this may be different. This is quite a while ago. Is they don't have the GPU for their virtual machines, and our software, the one I use, Agisoft, really requires that to speed up the process. So it just took way too long.
Nice. We'll have to talk offline on that one.
Sure.
Well, okay. Let's see here. Okay, Matt has something here real fast. Does the DJI Inspire allow any other payloads, for example, LiDAR?
Unfortunately not. That's one of the main limitations. That would be really great. It's really just, cameras. It doesn't even have the infrared capabilities like some of the other ones. So that is something to consider. But as far as just strict photogrammetry, it's really great because it has that large sensor.
Nice. All right, we'll squeeze in another one here. How do obstructions such as trees impact the results? Would the height have to be adjusted to navigate around at varying heights?
Yeah, so obstructions, you definitely want to stay clear of those. You can navigate around them, but if you want everything in your project area to be in the final ortho, you need to fly high. That's why I like the large sensor with the high resolution. I can fly above all those. So just flying higher with lower resolution or higher resolution.
So last one here, Megan, just the question of the NIR, the capabilities.
Sure. Again, ours doesn't have the near infrared. I think the Inspire 1 and the Matrice 200 have that capability.
Okay. All right. Well, I tell you what, we're going to go ahead, and if you have any more questions, please email us at URISA. And Ali, if we can post the email up in the chat window here. So at any rate, want to thank you all for coming today. Mark Buie, the GIS Coordinator for the City of Mesquite. Mark, we definitely appreciate it. Fantastic presentation. We'll have this posted up on our YouTube channel shortly after the presentation concludes, and we do a little editing. I'm your host, Brian King. I'm a board member of URISA Texas and work for Freese and Nichols, and my co-host, Ollie Powers. Ollie, if you want to say something.
Just thanks for joining us today for this. Again, we're going to just mention our events that we've got going on for April. So next week we've got our MAPI Hour going on in Austin at Red's Porch Quarry, and then we'll have the following week at the SCOG conference in San Antonio at the Friendly Spot. So we hope to see as many of you there as we can.
And big thank you to Ollie. She is a colleague and coworker of Mark. She works at the City of Mesquite as well. So this has been a collaboration effort and fantastic presentation. So we actually, with Mark, we really appreciate it. So we're going to let everybody go here. We're right at 1 o'clock and on time. We'll see you all next month. We'll be announcing the next speaker series presentation very soon via email. So stay tuned for that. And once again, thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Mark.